Imagine what our state would look like when the next generation of leaders have access to opportunities in both rural and urban communities. Now imagine what our state would look like when the next generation has access to information and how to invest in high-quality certifications or post-secondary degrees that could change the next generation of their family. Now imagine what our state would look like when the next generation of organizations are clamoring for our talent. Now, with everything you heard today, imagine if we don't do anything. I'm Reggie Bean. I'm honored to serve as Vice President of Culture, Engagement, and Change Management for Coca-Cola Consolidated, based right here in Charlotte, North Carolina. My role is primarily to inspire 17,000 teammates, 5,000 of which are based in North Carolina, to bring their best self to work by providing access to growth opportunities for both personal and professional growth. I want to take a minute just to stop and thank NC State and the Institute for Emerging Issues for really taking time and investing resources in today. So if I could just take a moment, and you join me in just thanking these organizations for investing in today. I have no doubt that once we collectively solve these issues that we've been talking about today, North Carolina will be the ultimate place to live, work, and vacation. So on my way over, our office is right over down in South Park, for those familiar with Charlotte. Was on my way over, and Leslie mentioned Charlotte traffic. So if you think about Charlotte traffic, and at about 1 o'clock this afternoon, there shouldn't have been any traffic, but there was. And so on my way over, I tend to play this game called Count the Construction. I'm counting the number of construction sites and cranes that are all around the city, and it's just a reminder of the growth and the opportunities that exist within the city. And so I went down, made a left on Trade, and there was more construction. So I was rerouted to go under 77, down Beatty's Ford, come back around, and there was a stark contrast to what I saw coming from South Park to Uptown, from when I went from Uptown to Beatty's Ford. And so I went from counting the construction to counting the amount of young black and brown men who were wandering aimlessly at 1:30 in the afternoon. And it was just a reminder that although the opportunities for growth exist in the city, Charlotte, Raleigh, and other areas in the state, that those opportunities for growth don't exist for all. So if you get a chance to travel, I'm not sure where you all are from, but if you get a chance to travel around the state, I would encourage you, take a detour. Go off the beaten path that you were planning to go on, just to see that the growth and opportunities is not equitable across the state. So growing up in Detroit, so my mom wanted to provide an education, single mom with 3 boys, she wanted to provide an education for her boys. So she sent us across town to a Catholic school called St. Leo. Now, St. Leo had some of the most efficient and angry nuns in the city of Detroit. Now, this was back when discipline was still an option in schools. But the point is, me and my 2 brothers, we had to catch the bus across Detroit, 3 buses, about an hour commute across Detroit. Now, this isn't the back in my day story, or I had to walk a mile to school uphill in 5 feet of snow. That's not what this is. My point is, each day when we caught the bus across the city, it created an opportunity for exposure. We saw what other communities live like. We saw productive citizens that we didn't necessarily see in our neighborhood. And it was the first pivotal point in my journey, just having the option and exposure. And so as we are doing this work and we're head down, and it's easy to get caught up in the work and not necessarily understanding that we're creating a vision and hope for our young people within our state. So this idea of economic mobility. That's a big idea, right? But the notion of economic mobility for all, like that's a big, hairy, audacious goal. I mean, there's a lot of energy around this topic of mobility, right? And it's not just because it's the right thing to do. You know, there's really no such thing as the right thing to do. It's truly an economic development strategy for our state. So just imagine the more people that are participating and that are productive in our economy, it will truly change the landscape of the workforce and the outcome. So I think about the other day, I was with a guy named Chef Ron. He ran the Culinary School of Charlotte. And their goal is to teach knife skills and life skills. And they teach those skills to people that are in the transitions of life. So you can be transitioning from one career to the next. You can be transitioning from incarceration back into society. But, you know, it reminded me that this big, hairy, audacious goal that we are trying to solve, there are models out there across the state. There's people that are already doing a lot of the work. Our challenge is how do we find them and then scale them? And so, you know, not necessarily reinventing the wheel, but finding them and scaling them in the most efficient way. So let's think about it. What's the true BHAG? What's the true opportunity? I mean, the true opportunity is really changing the landscape of our workforce, changing the landscape of our state. But I would ask you, what would our communities, what would our state look like if we had 2 million 25 to 44-year-olds with high-quality credentials and or post-secondary degrees? What would that look like? I can assure you that if I made a wrong turn down Beatties Ford at 1:30 in the afternoon, I wouldn't find our young black and brown men wandering aimlessly. They would have opportunities. They would have access to those opportunities. So I think about a few weeks ago, I was flying out to Little Rock, Arkansas. I was going through Charlotte Douglas, and a young lady was managing the kiosk, and she looked like she was around 20, 22 years old. Very energetic, well-spoken, articulate, and so I leaned in because I'm curious. Like, you know, somebody with that level of energy, why are you working at the airport? Why are you working at a kiosk? And you know, she reminded me that how difficult it was just for her to navigate. She had these dreams and aspirations, and she had absolutely no idea how to get started. She had no idea how to get started. And I think we heard a story earlier on kind of the same journey. You know, they were capable, had the tools, just didn't know how to get started. So just think about just access and opportunities for our young people in our state is so important and so critical to the work that we're doing. So about maybe 2 months ago, I was with a group of educators, K through 12 educators in Winston-Salem. And I was doing some organizational culture coaching, and I asked them, how would their experience be as an educator if there was more participation from parents? What would their experience be as educators if there was more experience from parents? I mean, more participation from parents. Now, you can imagine those educators, pick me, I got plenty to tell. But one seasoned teacher, she told me something that just broke my heart. She said, you know, there's children as young as 3rd grade that are coming to school hopeless. Hopeless. 3rd grade, that's when, you know, the realities of life shouldn't be hitting you that soon, but a lot of these schools that were primarily Title I schools, she said they're coming to school hopeless, and the thing that was more troubling, she said, they're bringing it from home. So if we had more parents participating, we may bring that hopeless energy to our classroom. So they were caught in this catch-22. So then my question was, well, what would happen if those parents knew that the state had a goal of really retooling 2 million emerging and young adults within our state? What would that look like? How would they respond knowing that their young people, their children had opportunities, had access to opportunities, that their children had access to opportunities to compete to be productive citizens? And then I thought, well, what would those children, how would they react if they knew that there were opportunities waiting for them, because the sign of hopelessness says, I don't believe that there's anything for me in the future. So what would those young people think if they knew that there were opportunities available to them in the future? And so we heard earlier about the Chetty study that ranked Charlotte 50th out of 50 within 50 cities studied across the nation. So I'm not here today to present more data, because you guys have heard data points and statistics all day. My challenge here is to simply say, we don't need any new research. We need new solutions. We need more courageous organizations to step up and say, I will help fund the Culinary Institute or the likes across the state and help them scale so they can employ some of our young people. So we don't need any more data points. We have all the data we need. The question is, what do we do with it? So we've heard from great leaders today, from businesses to philanthropic organizations to nonprofits, community organizations, faith-based organizations. We've heard from economic, development, workforce development institutions. We've heard from other states and really trying to understand what they're doing so we can, potentially partner, scale, whatever, research and copy, whatever that looks like. But what do we do with that information? Because if you look to the left and look to the right, and I know this is not Sunday morning, but I'm not going to ask you to say anything to your neighbor. But if you look to the left and right, the people who are responsible for those solutions are in this room. They are us. It will be up to us. So as we talk about moving ideas into action, they are us. They're in this room. So when you're immersed in this kind of work, it's easy to use words like them, they, those people, their problems, their communities. But let me just tell you one last story about a young man who grew up in an over-policed, underserved, dysfunctional environment without much access to opportunities. This young man had hopes and dreams, had ambitions. He just didn't have the playbook of life. There were several people along his path that were like a marathon running, and they were just sticking out water just to, hey, here's a drink for you, here's advice for you, here are the things that you may need in life. In fact, the story of this young man was he couldn't find opportunities, but the violence, the crime, abuse that this young man witnessed was enough to damage anybody emotionally and mentally for a lifetime. He had access to all the unproductive behavior that you can think of. So it followed him to school, it followed him to the playground, and oftentimes followed him to church. But I'm here today to remind you that it does truly take a village. It takes all of us. And you never know what role you may play in a young person's life to give them that little seed of encouragement. So I stand here today as an executive of a Fortune 100 company, a military veteran with several advanced degrees, a published author, a flawed father, a consistent friend, kind of a dysfunctional relationship with mom and dad, but that's neither here nor there. But I'm unashamed of my journey, and I'm authentically me. But it's because there were people like you who reminded me that your starting point is irrelevant. It's what you do along the race. It's how you run the race. So don't get so caught up in where you were born and the family that you were born in. It's really how you run the race. Will you do it with integrity? Will you do it with character? Will you do it with ambition? But it was people that gave me an opportunity, not a handout. So here we are, on the heels of 2020. You have the data. You've seen successful models. You have access to organizations. In 10 years, where are we going to celebrate? Or are we going to celebrate? Will we be celebrating moving the needle with those 2 million 25 to 44-year-olds? Or will we be celebrating we got another grant because we're still trying to solve the same problems? It's up to us. It's up to the people in this room. 10 years from now, what and where will we celebrate? So the choice is ours. We can go home and hit the garage, and that's somebody else's issue. We can take care of our own circle of friends and our family members and say, we can turn the channel on the news the next time we see another troubling stat that makes us feel a little uncomfortable. We can turn on our GPS the next time we make the wrong turn and we end up in a neighborhood that we're not familiar with and makes us a little uncomfortable because those things that we thought were far away are actually right around the corner from us. It's up to us. But I'll tell you, unless our young people have access to opportunities, access to compete at the highest level, and access to information, we won't be celebrating. So I'll end how I began. Imagine what our state will look like. Thank you.